G'day there, everyone. Daniel Anderson here, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. And with me today, joining me is Asif Rehmani. Now, Asif is a Microsoft MVP and also the CEO of VisualSP. So, welcome to the episode, Asif.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Now, mate, tell me a little bit about yourself. Where can we find you? And tell the viewers and listeners all about yourself, what it is that you do, so that we can get an insight into Asif.
All right, I'll try to be brief because if I told you everything about me, that would take the whole episode.
Wow.
uh, so here we go. As you mentioned, I am the CEO of VisualSP. And those of you who don't know what VisualSP is, what it is, the heck we do, we solve for the challenge of the last mile of content delivery to people. And sometimes when I say that, people are like, what do you mean? Well, the last mile of content delivery, getting people access to the information, support, training, communication at their moment of need. That's what we specialize in. Okay, and then there's various ways that we do that in. I got into the learning business back in 2004. Before that, I was consulting, and before that, I was an employee of organization. Now, when I got into learning and just training at that time, I was teaching C#, believe it or not, at that time. I was still fairly new, 3 or 4 years into it, and then I got into SharePoint training for that, and then I stayed into training, consulting, mentoring since then. So I started doing in-person training, videos, conference sessions, webinars, forums where I would participate. Microsoft awarded me MVP. I didn't even know before what MVP was, honestly. And in 2007, all of a sudden, like, oh, I'm an MVP. And so I've been an MVP since 2007 now, 15 years. It's been a blessing serving the community. And looking forward to this episode, talking
Yeah.
about what I do.
That's a long time, and I think I've been following your content and looking at lots of your videos and looking at also and consuming a lot of your conference talks and things like that. And one thing I noticed, and I think we share a similar passion in this area, is all around helping drive digital transformation, but from a user's side as well. And it goes, I guess, goes with your product as well. You've got a really big focus on the end user and helping them achieve the most they can out of the technology that is in place. Where do you think that passions come from?
Yeah, well, I can speak for myself, but I'm sure you'll find parallel in what I'm about to say also. If you think about a pie of, of a company's employees, you look at the slivers of how many executives are there in a company, then how many developers, administrators, power users, and then end users. And in any company, the end users will take up 90+% of the population. However, most of our efforts, usually from the training and just our focus on learning, goes to the other 10%, right? Or less, usually much less. So we're training or empowering the executives. We're talking to the power users even, and the developers, administrators. But what about the end users? I definitely made that mistake back in the day when I was making lots of, which I thought, amazing applications using SharePoint Designer, InfoPad, SharePoint out of the box, and then after that, Power Apps, Power Automate. And many people are also making those right now, but not understanding exactly what is the usage of those things. One that got into my head as to, wait a minute, who is actually using it? What value are they getting out of it? Why does this all matter? That's when I started really totally diving into the end user part of the story. Why does it matter? I'm sure you've heard about it, WIIFM.
Yes.
What's in it for me? I always refer to that as a radio WIIFM. And the reason I say that is because Radio WIIFM is a radio station that's running in every end user's mind as to, this guy or this lady is telling me this thing. Why should I do it? Why should I care? And if you can't tune into that radio station, guess what? They will tune you out very, very quickly. So once I understood that many years ago, I kind of steered my own career and my own company, VisualSP, towards that direction that, listen, we really need to serve the employees and companies, the end users. And now with pandemic, is more important than ever. right? For them to understand what they should be doing, what they should not be doing, what's the best way of doing things. Oh my God, this is going to sound funny, but I was reading your post actually today, Daniel. You were talking about the versions of documents, right? And I
Yes.
actually
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
commented on that. You said that not in these words specifically, but people are still doing this where they're uploading documents with version 1, version 2, and version 3. And I talk about this specific disease with some of my other colleagues also. Susan Hanley calls it versionitis, where people do that, still not understanding what SharePoint can do. Same thing exists in Teams, same thing exists in OneDrive and other places where people don't understand exactly how things are done, and then they do it the other way, and then there's just creates that frustration. So
Yeah.
why even
And
let them get to that point, right?
yeah, that's right. And I think a lot of times when, and I'm sure you find it as well, is when organisations put in these or try and adopt these technologies, whether it's SharePoint or Office 365 or Microsoft Teams in general.
Yeah,
A lot of times, training or change management or user adoption is part of that type of project, let's say, but it's just that part of a project. It might be,
exactly.
an hour or two of training and off you go, try and use it. Whereas, the learning path really does need to be an ongoing process, and it needs to be continually evolved and continually had with users. And that versioning thing is a really good example of, the reality of where a lot of people still are. I
Yeah,
mean, OneDrive and SharePoint have been around for you and I. We've been using it day in and day out for forever and a day, and we kind of take those things for granted. But those little things are still really, really, I guess, relevant to a lot of people out there. Now, with where do you see, what are some common challenges that you see organizations facing with training and learning and trying to implement and have this learning culture?
sure. I'll give you some very specific examples because I was dealing with that with our customers. One of them, and it's on record actually, the case study is going to go out pretty soon. City of
Mm.
Culver City here in California. There's a
Yep.
lady over there named Anissa De Vicente, if I'm pronouncing the name right. She's a webmaster over there. One of the things she mentioned to us that, we have these live online seminars that we conduct, very critical. These things, people have to be there, but we're getting 4 or 5 people in the room. We're not able to get enough people, and these are very critical things to do. Uh, so through VisualSP, what we did was we said, all right, what is the actual problem? We need more people within the seats, within this webinar. How can we politely intercept their flow of work where they are and show them what they need to see? So in their specific case, we made an announcement banner that comes up within, I believe, within a specific SharePoint site, and it comes up automatically, an announcement banner using VisualSP,
Mm.
saying this is a very important seminar that you need to attend. They see it. It doesn't block them, but it informs them when they're ready. They click on it. They're able to see it within a pop-up that comes up afterwards saying, "Here's where you go to get information about the webinar," and then they attended it. And she says that within her own practice doing this thing, their attendance went from 5 to 30 people, and she could not believe it. So the reason that happened is because we helped the people instead of interrupting them, instead of forcing them, and that help is very, very necessary in my case, and in my opinion, in my humble opinion. You have to help instead of try to force feed and train.
Mm.
And when you do that, then it just comes from a place of trust and support. And those things are a lot more easy to digest for people than a force-fed training that you must go to be compliant, and then you move on, because then eh, people usually turn away from that, saying, you know what, I don't need to do this, or they just do it just to check a checkbox. It's more about how
Mm.
do you get them help at their moment of need. There's another one actually. This reminded me from your example of the whole versionitis thing. That so this has been there for a long time, right? You mentioned OneDrive,
Yep.
SharePoint, we've been using for ages. So why does this still happen? Well, we actually did something about it for one of our customers, where when you're uploading a document, at that point in time, when you do that action, then at that point in time, a walkthrough comes up letting you know, all right, listen, you're already getting a version of this thing every time you upload. You don't need to do that. That's exact procedure. Because at the moment when they're actually doing this thing, that's where you're going to get their attention, not before. not after. That's too late already. We want to get that at that moment. But that all that stuff comes from critically and proactively thinking about it, of what does the person need, what do they need, and what should the learning culture be to support that need.
Mm. And I think also the challenges that I see with organisations as well is, and there's a lot of talk at the moment around context switching and the
Yeah,
flow of work and all of that type of thing, but it's more spoken about in terms of an organisation's got lots of different applications. I need to go here to apply for leave. I need to go
yeah,
here to put an expense claim in. Do all of that type of stuff, and there's that has a real impact on productivity. So if I
sure
have to go
does.
out to different applications all the time, I'm wasting time. But then again, if I don't know how to actually use that or go through that process, it's just wasting a lot of time. Now, what this in context, I guess, well, reducing the context switching.
Hmm.
How relevant is that? And your product does this, and you're heavily involved in this. But
Oh yeah,
how much of an impact does that have on learning as well? So let's say we're using Microsoft Teams.
yeah,
Rather than having to jump out, and a lot of organizations have this where they've got a learning hub, but it's in SharePoint, and I have to, as a user, go somewhere else. And a lot of times I find that people just don't do it, and then they'll go and use something else that they're familiar with. So this flow of work that we talk about, how important do you see that in the learning side of things?
yeah. I think this has become more important than ever since the pandemic began, especially seeing how people really work and helping them, because the frustration is already there from the lockdowns and everything else that's there. So as you mentioned, I have done lots of work actually in that. When I say work, I mean actually talking to some of the luminaries out there also about their thoughts. The person who actually coined learning in the flow of work, the other people who have coined the other, there's a methodology called 5 moments of need
Yeah.
methodology. These people are the ones that you really want to talk to because they've thought about this very, very deeply. And I've talked to them about that. And what I understood, you're 100% right, that context switching, something that we knew about also, does take a big toll on the mind, the people. When you're doing something and you get out of that context and go do something else and come back, and that doesn't even have to be technology, it could be something else also that you're doing. It takes an approximate 20 minutes for you to get back into the flow of work, into the context in your mind that you were thinking about before. That's a lot of time.
Mm.
And we all experience that with our Facebook and Instagram, everything else kind of pinging here, like, oh, you switch context and you do something quickly and come back, you're like, what was I doing? So that's a lot of time that's lost. Uh, the other part that you mentioned, I'll quantify that as well, the amount of applications that people have. I believe there was a study saying there was 14 different applications an average knowledge worker has to go through every single day. 14. That's a big number. We have to
Yes.
go back and forth and all. And yes, if you do have to go and context switch every time, well, now you can calculate the amount of time that you're going to waste. So the thing that I mentioned to people in that is that you want to try to keep the context the same as much as possible. It will not be always possible, but as much as possible. So, for example, this is also a very specific example of a customer that actually we helped on that. There is a course on compliance that has to be taken. If that course is not taken on cybersecurity specifically, though that company could get in trouble, legal trouble.
Mm.
The problem is they're emailing people, it's not working. They're telling people, well, telling right now when they're remote, how do you tell people anyway? But it's not working. So what do? You go to where they currently are. As I like to call it, what is their water cooler? Where is the place where they're already going anyway? In this company's situation, it was the HR application. So you're going there, you're looking at your leave of absence, you're looking at your payroll, all the other things, web application, right? So what we did was we actually made a pop-up that appears automatically using VisualSP and saying, hey, wait a minute, you need to take this compliance training. It's due on November 12th. And if they acknowledge saying, yes, I got it, it gets recorded. So now you have delivered the message. Now it's up to them. So it is contextually bringing the learning, or in this case, the information to the user where they are, and that's very much helpful. It blocks from context switching. In fact, we even went a bit further, where if you want to take the training, you can just say, okay, I'm ready, and the training is right there. So you you look at the video, you do the quiz, and you're done, and you're still at your HR application. So I try as much as possible to minimize the context switching. There's actually one more last thing I'll say here. There's a concept from the 5 moments of need methodology, which we could talk about at some point. Founders, it says that if you can get people within 2 clicks and 10 seconds to where they need to be, you're going to have the most success in keeping their attention and getting them to where you need them to do. And that's what we try to optimize on also as a company. And that's what I also look for myself, as to how can we get the people the information they need 2 clicks in 10 seconds, which is hard,
Yeah,
by the way, but it's
it
definitely
is. Yeah,
possible.
yeah,
It's very
absolutely.
hard.
And we'll talk about this a little bit later
Sure.
around Microsoft Viva. And I think that's a really important point that you make is being able to deliver this type of information to where the people are working, rather than me
Yes.
having to go and find that. Now, I've heard you talk a lot about also micro learning. So I go back to the example I mentioned before about when you're implementing or onboarding people to a new platform, there's generally really long training sessions, hour long, 2 hours, and things like that, and people find it hard to retain information after they've left that training session. So how important is this concept of micro learning? So having smaller little learning
Yeah.
chunks.
Um, I started talking about microlearning maybe about 10 or so years ago, but then a few years back, I actually added another concept to it, and that's contextual microlearning.
Hmm.
Contextual microlearning, which, once you say it, like, oh, of course I know what that means. It's bringing context to microlearning, right? Both together. I think it's a super important concept. If you can provide quick bursts of information to users as they need it, especially because that's what they're already used to. We live in the world right now where what do? We go to Snapchat, we go to Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and everywhere else, where we're getting the same kind of information in very quick bursts. And that's how our news comes together. So if that's happening already in our real social life, why not bring the same experiences or same type of experiences where we are? Now, that's micro learning, great, but micro learning in context is better, just because, like we talked about before, because the context switching is not happening if you bring the micro learning in context. That's the main realization that I had a few years back, as to, all right, well, micro learning is great, but you're still switching context to consume the micro learning and coming back. That's still wasted time. So how do you bring that micro learning, but in context to where people are? So that's what I've been preaching for quite some time. Contextual microlearning is a word actually that I coined also. I was surprised that nobody else has coined it before. I'm like, wow, I'm not sure why nobody has thought about that before. I made some videos about it, and when I talk to people about it, they just get it. It just makes sense because it's not something that's rocket science. It's just logical thinking. Yes, I need what I need now. I need it in small bursts, and I need it where I am instead of going somewhere.
Mm. And the lack of training obviously has a or lack of knowledge and training has a big impact on user adoption. And I know a big part of what you do and focus on is driving digital transformation, also that user adoption story as well. How have you seen and maybe can draw on examples on how what does a good training culture look like for you?
Yeah. There's an article that I wrote and I pushed it out on LinkedIn kind of almost hesitantly about, this is also about 10 years ago. It was called Thoroughly Training End Users is a Waste of Time. Or
Mm,
actually, I just said, not even thoroughly, I just said training end users is a waste of time. And I was already a trainer at that time, or even way before that. So I did get a lot of frack from my trainers, my colleagues, saying, "How can you say that? That doesn't make any sense. You are a trainer yourself." But that's when I dug in and I tried to explain as much as possible using the different mechanisms that I usually use to explain, which is video and articles and stuff like that. That, wait a minute, guys, I'm talking about thoroughly training end users, that is a waste of time. And the reason I say this is because look at what's happening right now. And I've done this myself, by the way. I've written about it in that same article that I went to a organization and I tried to train these 30 people in that organization, 2 days of training, SharePoint fundamentals, lists, libraries, pages, web parts, security. And oh my God, I failed. I failed because they understood the concepts, but they did not know how to apply those concepts at their moment of need. That second part of it is where it all comes together. So the training culture has to solve for not just the formal part of the training, but also the other 70%, which is the learning in the flow for the workflow learning part of it. And that's something that I did not get before before I had that experience. So in my opinion, to answer your question, good training looks like the following. You do definitely do the formal training, but you don't necessarily call it training. You can call it orientation, awareness session. You can call it launch or something like that, where you're telling them what is it that you want to tell them. You tell them why it's important to them. You tell them what is going to change for them for their role. And you tell them where to go to get help if needed. And that's it. And you stop. After that, which could be a couple of hours actually, or 4 hours. I've done that at Sony Corporation before, where I actually held these kind of awareness sessions a long time back. Then you let it go, and then you take the workflow learning take effect, which is, okay, I am stuck. What do I do now? How do I get help on the screen? Or if I need tier 2 support, how do I get to someone? Because people do figure it out after that. Right? So it's more of the formal training, the workflow learning, and also there's another 20% of it. So that is more social learning that's happening as well throughout. So I talk to colleagues, I talk to peers, and I get my help from there. So 70-20-10 model, 70% workflow or learning the flow of work, 20% peer-to-peer social learning, and then you got the 10%, which is formal learning. Challenge, of course, has been that we usually focus on the 10% a lot more than the other 90%, which is unfortunate. But that I believe is the best way to do it, in my humble opinion.
What about sort of you touched on a little bit there, more outcome driven
Yeah.
training. So and you mentioned SharePoint lists, right? So Microsoft or SharePoint lists, Microsoft lists, good example. So we could do a training session all about Microsoft lists. All the technical things, site columns, and all of that type of general stuff. But people, I find, tend to zone out with that. Whereas where you've got, and I'll use the example of a HR person, where you're using Microsoft lists and you're using it to track applicants for a job.
Sure.
So you're training them about the actual process of how to do that piece of work, but in turn, you're actually using lists. So you're teaching them that at the same time, and it seems to resonate with them a lot more because it is actually helping them do part of their job.
Yeah.
So that's I think that there's been a bit of a change in the way that type of training's been delivered, rather than that general stuff.
Yeah,
Which is
completely agree
interesting.
with you that you give the example of lists, and the way I think of this is any kind of specific tool that you give them, it has to be looked upon as a tool that's helping you, and not as an end goal by itself. So we can't focus on look how cool the lists are. Yes, you and I know how cool the lists are, but the end users don't care. They want to get their job done. In this case, if it's a HR specific job, that they're doing, well, they need to get their job done, and the tool in this case happens to be list or something else. How is it going to help me do it the most efficient way so I can get it done with the KPIs, the key performance indicators that I've been told that I need to do it in? If you could show me that, I'm sold. And I could tell you so many stories about that, of what I've done with people. But at the end of the day, it's simple. It's not that difficult. It's just these tools have to make sense. If something is not serving me, doesn't matter if it's Microsoft Teams, sorry, Microsoft, but even if it's something that's super, super important and awesome, like Teams, if it's not serving you, don't use it. Obviously, we know that Teams is going to help you, and there's many tools like that. But that goes with any tool. It has to be a way to get to where you need to be. If you can show
It
them
does.
that, it's sold.
Yeah. I've just changing tact a little bit. we talk, and there's a big push for around the topic of employee experience,
Yeah.
and now Microsoft have launched Microsoft Viva, and you obviously there's a module of Viva Learning that I'm sure is something that you are heavily involved in.
Oh, yes.
Now, I've heard a lot of different people explain Viva in a lot of different ways. How are you explaining Viva as a whole to your customers?
Sure, sure. Microsoft Viva by itself is a brand. It's not really a product. This is the way I see it, the way I've always seen it.
Hmm.
And under that brand are employee experiences that are being rolled out. They just happen to be rolled out within Microsoft Teams. And because they're rolled out within Microsoft Teams, there's the four tiles that you can have within Microsoft Teams, right? Viva Learning, Viva Insights, Viva Topics, and Viva Connections. Three of them, everything except Viva Connections, you have to pay for $4 per user per month. Connections is free, and then we can talk more about all of them. But digging into Viva Learning specifically, well, actually, I guess we'll dig into that a little bit more later. Let me pull back and talk about Viva as a whole first. Now, these are the four apps that Microsoft has deployed on the Viva brand, with once again the intent being, how do we help the employee experience? We already have lots of stuff, a lot of tools, as we talked about, a lot of things out there using, workplace analytics, lists, libraries, the training portals. We have dashboards, all kinds of things. How do we pull it together and bring them where the people are, which happens to be within Teams? And
Mm.
that's what's really happening. These four things represent Microsoft's attempt, a very good one, to bring those things together within these four umbrellas. Now, having said that, my uh, forecast here is going to be that this is the start. Microsoft will go beyond and have additional apps also in the future within the Viva brand. But right now, that's what we have, and that's what's focused on right now with employee experiences.
And do you think, if we focus on Viva Learning now, do you think that is going to provide a complete learning system for organizations?
The short answer, no. Reason being, Viva Learning is a great solution which serves as part of a bigger umbrella of your learning culture. When it first was announced, there were interfaces and stories that were being told which changed over time. So, for example, I'll give you a very specific example here, Daniel. What people want to do is they want to assign courses to people, to their people who are reporting to them, and then track the progress. Well, that is not available in Viva Learning. So just by that one fact by itself, most
Yeah.
people say, oh, well, I can't use this as my complete learning solution. And I agree with them. Please don't get me wrong, though. Viva Learning is a great initiative, and I've talked about it at conferences and webinars. I've talked about it in podcasts and all sorts of places. So I think it's a great, great initiative, but it's a part and not complete part of a blended learning solution that employees need. And when I think about Viva Learning, it's an aggregator. It's an aggregator of a lot of your learning that's available to your organization in one place. And that place happens to be within Teams, which is where you are anyway. So that's the reason Microsoft went this route, and I'm glad. But the true story is going to be coming when you do the integrations with other things or continue the story even outside of Teams. What about when I'm in OneDrive? What happens there? I'm in SharePoint. I'm in Yammer. I'm in my HR application. I'm in my Workday, ServiceNow, whatever. How do I get learning at my moment of need anywhere? And that's the complete blended learning solution that you have to think about as an organization. Viva Learning is part of that solution.
Yeah, and you mentioned before about that there's lots of different inputs that we can have to Viva Learning. So we've got Pluralsight and we've got LinkedIn Learning and things like that. But organisations can also have their own
Yeah.
library of training as well, which I think is. And again, you touched on different applications there as well. And one of the good things about Viva Learning that I can see happening is that with all of I can't remember how many applications you mentioned before, but I think it's about 14 different apps that,
Yeah.
that people have to use. But having that training library, I guess, of these different applications, and then using Viva Learning as the mechanism to actually deliver that, I think is going to be really, really powerful too.
Yeah, completely agree. I
Yeah.
referred before to the 5 moments of need methodology. That, by the way, has been around for a long, long time and has been serving a lot of organizations, big ones like Walmart and Colgate and others like that. And the second moment of need in that 5 moments of need is actually deep learning. That moment of need when you're getting introduced, number one, and then second, when you're deep learning, that's exactly what Viva Learning does. So you're deep learning, let's say I want to get better as a salesperson in Dynamics 365 customer engagement, so Dynamics 365 sales. So I go
Mhm.
into Viva Learning, I look in the LinkedIn learning course for Dynamics, and I just go deep inside and learn the whole course. Great, you need to do that. Absolutely. Same thing if you have other applications that you need to get help with, and you go into Viva Learning and there's a module for those applications, you go deep learning in there. Wonderful, always needed. Having said that, almost I would say 99.999% of the world's population does not have total recall. Our memories are faulty. So you can do this deep learning, but when you actually need to use that, that is when the other job aids and performance support is necessary for you to help you do that particular job, to remind you. So you do need additional things as well. But yes, for digging deep, Viva Learning and things like that are super necessary. For
Mm.
other
And
performance, yeah, you need other tools as well.
yeah, and I'm sure you've dug into Viva Learning quite significantly. But uh, one of the interesting things that I've seen in there is also around how this can help managers. So especially in the onboarding, or not just onboarding, but for their team. So managers being able to share. Uh, or I'll call them packages of learning,
Yeah.
or different groupings of learning to their team that they know they're going to get use of. I think that's going to be something that, again, from a manager point of view, is something that's going to be really powerful too.
Yeah, absolutely. You definitely need to do that to get people information they need. I think it does have a good future.
Mm,
It's just that I really hope that people understand the exact reasoning for Viva Learning to exist. There is some misinformation out there where, is this a replacement for everything? Is this the only thing that I need for my whole learning environment? And that is not the case. That's just not the goal either. So that's the reason I talk about Viva Learning so much, to help people understand exactly where does it fit in to your learning story. You do need an LMS. You do need a digital coach. This is actually what
mm.
we call ourselves, VisualSP, as a digital coach, where you are somewhere and it helps you in that somewhere, not just only in Teams, but anywhere you are. But it's a part of the story. Uh, Things are evolving. I have been in touch with the product manager for Viva Learning. I've been doing also my own digging, and I see a great future for it. But still, the story, it's not even in production yet, as you know. So there's
Mm.
a long way to go. By the way, and I'll give you later also, there's a blog that I've put out for Viva Learning. I've had many people say that this actually helped a lot of their answer a lot of their questions. Would love people to give feedback also as to if they're able to get their questions answered, and if not, please let me know. I can add more information there as well. But it is still a developing story.
Yes, it is. It is. It'll be very, yeah, very interesting to see where that goes. And I think from my understanding as well, well, you can tell me a bit about this maybe as well, is around the sharing, the social the social side of learning as well, and being able to share content and things like that throughout Viva Learning, and obviously Microsoft Teams as well. Is that, with have you seen things like that change now with the current, obviously with hybrid work and people working from home? And you mentioned the water cooler before, and there's a lot of learning that goes on in, physically when you're sitting next to somebody or you're talking to somebody just during your day to day work. have you seen that being a challenge now as well, more than before?
Absolutely. I mean, just imagine you're sitting in the office and you can just tap someone. Hey, Sarah,
Mm.
could you show me? Could you tell me? Could you, point me to this? You can't do that anymore. Now Sarah is only available within a tool like Microsoft Teams, where you can ask Sarah. Now, how does Sarah? I'm just using Sarah over here. How does she tell you where it is?
At least it's not Megan Bowen.
Yeah, I should have used Megan actually, but
Yeah,
anyway, how does Sarah tell you exactly the information that you're looking for? And by the way, it doesn't have to be learning information. It could be any policy or whatever. So one of the really good things that Viva Learning is doing is that it lets you get that information directly within a chat or within a conversation, right? You can pull something from the knowledge base, saying, all right, well, you know what? There's a course on this, or there's some information on this that might be helpful to you. You use the what's called the messaging extension that exists for
yeah.
Viva Learning. Pull it up, do the search, searches the whole knowledge base of Viva Learning, gets you the information, send it out. And that's the second best, definitely not the best, but the second best way of doing things now that we're doing it remotely. Of course, the best would be if Sarah could just point at my screen saying, here, go here, do this. But that cannot happen right now.
But that also raises the point of view of this digital coach that you talk
Yeah,
about, and that's probably more important than ever, like right now too.
I completely agree. And
Mm.
the reason we went with the digital coach, the reason we went and do the things that we do at VisualSP is because of these situations where when I'm stuck and I need to be pointed to something as to click here, how do you point? For us, the pointing is the walkthroughs that we create. In a walkthrough, I'm sure you've seen the walkthroughs and these bubbles that come up basically, right? Saying,
Mm.
oh, here's some new functionality. Oh, click here to do this. Oh, have you noticed that? They have to be used properly, by the way, because if they're used overused, I would say they could get annoying. Then they can get in your way. But we do it in such a way where a digital coach is a true coach to help you and the moment of need in context of your environment. So it doesn't take you to a demo environment, in context of your environment and in the flow of your work. A true digital coach is very much like Sarah coming in saying, okay, go ahead and click here, Asif. So you see this? This is how you can upload a file. Now click over there. This is how you can sync a file to your
Mm.
laptop. And by the way, let me tell you that when you're syncing files, don't worry, you will not lose all the space on your computer because it's 5 GB here. They're just pointers to that file and they will get downloaded when you double click on it. Like those kind of minute details people want to know about. They want to know, tell me, how does this affect what I'm about to do? That's exactly what we solve for. At the moment of need, when I'm trying to click on that sync button, what is that going to do for me? Yeah, the digital
Yeah.
coach is super helpful, in my humble opinion, when that
Yeah,
happens.
yeah, yeah. Very good. Now, as we wrap things up, mate, I could talk to you forever about this sort of stuff. I really, really love the way that you are presenting things and explaining things from the user perspective. There's a lot of things that you shared there about tips and best practices and thoughts around that entire sort of change and training. So. Look, I could talk to you about it forever. I'll have to get you on to another episode and we can dive a little bit deeper. But for everybody that's watching and listening, where can they find, well, where's the best place to engage with you, read your content, and just stay up to date with your learnings as well?
Yeah, my first preference is I put all of our content on our blog. So if you go to
Mm-hmm.
visualsp.com, from visualsp.com, you can look at the blog, and then in there's going to be all this blog entry. The second best way, in my opinion, is if you go to my LinkedIn profile. Feel free to connect with me. There's articles and then a lot of information I put out there as well. And then we also have a mailing list if you want to enter that. On a weekly basis, our team and myself put together some hopefully very specific, important information that people are thinking about and try to get that information out there. I'm also on Twitter. As you know, I think we've interacted on Twitter before also, Daniel. I don't do it as much as I should maybe, but that's in order of preference, my blog first, then LinkedIn, and then after that, Twitter. And Twitter is just my first name, last name together, Asif Rehmani.
Very good. I'll post all that in the show notes so everybody's got access to all of that. But mate, once again, really appreciate you taking the time out. I know it's getting late in the day there for you, so really appreciate jumping on the call. And we'll chat again soon. So thanks for joining.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Daniel.